Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope the week's gone well and I hope you, your loved ones and your family are in a good place. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Deutsche Bank. Our global forecast has turned decidedly gloomier. Much of the world has struggled mightily with the virus and the economic fallout. We now see global GDP falling 10% in the second quarter and remaining well below pre-virus levels through most of next year. And I agree with that prognosis. On the 6th of April, I said, I also know that we're about to enter the Great Depression. There's been a heroic effort to throw a lot of money at it, but it's not going to succeed. 3.2 million claims filed this week, 33.5 million jobs lost in 7 weeks. Anil Vohra speaks to the challenge. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. This has been an interesting development, falling again. The delta in the 2-year yield truly reflects the state of the economy. Tavi Costa, an unprecedented dysfunctional macro environment impelling the Fed to suppress rates due to extreme debt levels. The June 2021 Fed funds future is now pricing an implied risk of negative Fed funds rates. That's from Andreas Steno. Our simple model has started to ponder whether negative long dollar yields could be the name of the game. In fact, this is now my baseline. So we are seeing some very extraordinary moves in the financial markets, and I do expect the 10-year yield to go deep into negative territory. 2 reasons. One, I think it's going to be very deflationary over the next 12 months, and then this, and basically, therefore, I think we're going to see this adjustment. Plus, with this amount of debt, you want negative interest rates anyway. Bitcoin rose as much as 2.7% to a high of $10,000.70. It's currently around 9,800. Paul Tudor Jones, who's an extraordinary investor, seems to be very bulled up about it as well. Home Thoughts, a thread on the 99 names of God, or Asma al-Husna. This is from A.A. Olomi. A common belief among some Sufi interpretations is there are 99 names with one hidden name, Ism-e-Azam. Only certain saintly figures or wali know the hidden name, knowledge of which grants miraculous abilities. This is a street in Mombasa in 1900 from K Researcher. Mombasa Old Town, where this photograph has been taken, is currently under lockdown. I go back to those comments that Boris Johnson made at UNGA last year. He spoke of smart cities which will pullulate with sensors all joined together by the Internet of Things, bollards communing invisibly with lampposts, and asked, how do you plead with an algorithm? I like this from Femin9 Returned. Husband's birthday this weekend, want to take him somewhere for a romantic getaway, can't decide between the kitchen and the bathroom. And that is indeed the way we all live now. It is certainly a new 21st century that we find ourselves in. There is a luminous and fairy tale feel to life in quarantine, and as you know, most fairy tales have an oftentimes dark and dangerous and unspoken undercurrent. I sit in my study where I'm sitting now, and it's as if my hearing is sharpened. I hear the breeze, the bird song, which is a cacophony in the morning, nature in its many forms, and the urban background noise, which was once the constant accompaniment to daily life, has entirely retreated. The nights are dark. Even last night, looking for the moon, I didn't see it. The stars are bright, and the neighbors are long gone. You felt the land taking you back to what was there 100 years ago, to what has been there always. And of course, Don DeLillo wrote, everything is barely weeks, everything is days. We have minutes to live. This I came across from Lizife on Twitter, a little girl doing her homework. Very beautiful. There is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. In Niger, a massive sandstorm engulfed Niger's capital, turning the sky blood red. Returning to A.A. Alomi, there is a tradition that in the end, even the angels will die. The angel of death will reap all until it alone is left. Then God will command, and so too will Azrael end. All that will remain will be God and the eternal until the resurrection. And there is something karmic in this COVID-19. Invisible has already defeated the most expensive aircraft carriers, lurks everywhere and in silence. And it does feel like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. A.A. Alomi again, for protection from plagues, one can recite Al-Baqi 136 times daily. Albert Camus, a pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. Again, Camus, from the same book, they fancied themselves free, and no one will ever be free so long as there are pestilences. I like this photograph of dusk from Phoenix_X_13. And in a straight contest between coronavirus and bullshit, the coronavirus wins every time. The problem is there are a lot of bullshitters around leading their countries. On a brighter note, Louis de Camões, love is a fire that burns unseen, a wound that aches yet isn't felt, and always contentment, a pain that rages without hurting, a longing for nothing but too long, a loneliness in the midst of people, a never feeling pleased when pleased, a passion that gains when lost in thought. It's being enslaved of your own free will. It's counting your defeat a victory. It's staying loyal to your killer. But if it's so self-contradictory, how can love, when love chooses, bring human hearts into sympathy? Camões also said, time changes and our desires change. What we believe, even what we are, is ever changing. The world is change, which forever takes on new qualities. I went back finally to William Golding's book, The Spire, which is an extraordinary book. And in that book, Golding writes, at the moment of vision, the eyes see nothing. The moment of vision is in essence a non-linear thing. It's a moment of deep insight. Political reflections. Reporter, how will history look back on your decision to drop charges against Flynn? Bill Barr, well, history is written by the winners, so it largely depends on who's writing the history. Very true. What if Western and China's elites are working harmoniously to preserve their power, and COVID-19 alarmism was engineered to facilitate that? Adam Scrabble. Growth was led 10% Ghana and DR Congo, 5% Russia, Brazil, Peru, India, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Belarus, Bangladesh, Egypt, Kuwait, Bahrain, Nigeria, Oman, Armenia, Cameroon, Bolivia, Senegal, Honduras, Sudan. Video for me. And in those numbers, you see the spillover effect I've been speaking about for the last few days. We've gone from being a developed economy thing, and we're spilling over into the emerging markets and frontier markets. Population density render of the entire world. Zoom in or open the image in another tab window to see the fine detail here. It comes out quite well even at this scale, under the radar. As I said, the Malcolm Gladwell moment has definitively arrived. In fact, it arrived in February, you could argue. The tipping point moment in an epidemic is when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. Phylogenetic estimates support that COVID-2 pandemic started sometimes around October 6 through 11 December, so somewhere in there. I err on the side of it starting at an earlier date around October. And this is pretty interesting, talking about the spike protein characterized by a particularly large number of recurrent mutations, more than 15 events, which may signpost convergent evolution and are of particular interest in the context of adaptation of SARS-CoV-2 to the human host. To date, the genetically closest known lineage is found in horseshoe bats, RATG13. However, this lineage shares 96% identity with SARS-CoV-2, which is not sufficiently high to implicate it as the immediate ancestor of SARS-CoV-2. And listen to this one sentence. The zoonotic source of the virus remains unidentified at the date of writing because there is no zoonotic source. That's a fact. The genomic diversity of the 7666 SARS-CoV-2 genomes is represented as maximum likelihood phylogenies in a radial, in this figure 1.6. Genomic diversity of SARS-CoV-2 in the UK, USA, Iceland, and China. The main exception to this pattern is China, the source of the initial break, where only a fraction of the global diversity is present, as you can see. I've written about the origin of the COVID-19 previously. That link is on the website. These were comments carried by the Chinese ambassador to the United States in Chinese, but with a translation. And that speaks to what William Yang was writing about in that article I referred to. In response, China unleashed its wolf warriors, led by its diplomats, and this Chinese ambassador is obviously one of those. 15th of October 2018, I was writing War is Coming, and increasingly, as I've said previously, I see this as an act of war, actually. We know viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and certainly We remain in the midst of non-linearity and exponential risks. Have a look at this. Currency returns year to date. This is from IV_technicals, and it's really quite an extraordinary scorecard. We'll come to things like Brazil and the Turkish lira momentarily. Dollar index 99.731. Obviously, the market movements into negative interest rate territory has undone a little bit of the dollar strength, but it's very strong when you consider the interest rate curve. Euro dollar 108.37. As I said on the 22nd of March, tourism is stopped out in 2020. And I also now feel stopped out for most of 2021. And I feel behavior and consumption of tourism is set to change more permanently. Here from Trinomics, tourism dependency globally, top 25 most dependent. Commodity markets, thankfully, the UN FAO Global Food Price Index dropped 3.4% in April, minus 3% year on year, primarily due to several negative COVID-19 impacts on international food markets. This is from Ole S. Hansen. Impacts on international food markets, not least sugar and vegetable oils, due to their biofuel link to collapsing crude oil prices. Gold, last trading at 17.50. I'm very bullish now. I think it's a perfect storm and a great trading opportunity right now with a tight stop, 1680, or a little bit lower. Note, I have 1740-ish as the breakout point from this bull flag, which should get things really started on the upside. That's Adam Mancini. As JP Morgan said in 1912, gold is money, everything else is credit. 24th of February, admittedly, we had then a spill, but I wrote then the viral moment has arrived. At this point, I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. And then 22nd of March, I reiterated that. I said, I still believe gold will soon turn viral to the upside. I'm looking for $2,000 plus, and I remain of that view. And I see it as a perfect trade setup. Crude oil, where are we now? We've been up and down. $25.38. It's quite a stunning recovery from those negative rates. But I think that optimism is overdone, but you always overshoot to the upside and the downside in matters crude oil. Emerging markets, the Turkish lira drops to a record low at an exchange rate of 7.1 to the dollar. That's from Revised Capital. The state is taking legal actions against London-based institutions who allegedly had launched a manipulative attack on the currency. They are going to bring exchange rate controls imminently, and many other places are going to be doing the same. 20th of January last year, I was writing a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I said, I remain a little surprised that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have not visited economic warfare on Istanbul because it does look ripe for the plucking. Brazil's real slides more than 2% to a fresh record low of 5.84 against the dollar after the rate cut. 6 is now in sight, and it's down 31% for the year. Rate spreads blowing out too. The central bank's credibility is being eroded. This is bad, says one trader. Not least being eroded by Bolsonaro, who said, Brazilians aren't infected by anything even when they fall into a sewer. Well, he's experimenting with that idea as we speak, and the numbers in Brazil are frankly exponential. He also said at Unga, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Let's move on to Africa. Caseload is 54,027, but obviously vastly undercounted in my view. Deaths 2,074, recoveries 18,636. That's from Africa's CDC. Evolution of cases in Botswana, Burundi, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Rwanda, South Africa, Eswatini, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, since the 100th case was confirmed. That's from the COVID-19 bot. For the first time, 3 small population countries in Africa in green are on our chart of most active coronavirus infections per capita. We include small population Maldives, given its climate. That's Charlie Robertson. 2nd of March, when people were highly skeptical that this was coming to Africa, I said, we know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. And what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Africa has carried out 685 tests per million people. Very deep dive article by Reuters Graphics. By comparison, European countries have carried out nearly 17 million tests, the equivalent of just under 23,000 per million. CAR's Health Minister Pierre Somzi was surprised to learn from an aid agency's press release that the country had only 3 ventilators. He had no idea they had any, he said. If you don't test, you don't find. That's the director of the Africa CDC. That's the point. So far, 868,227 COVID tests have been carried out in Africa, according to a Reuters tally. 685 tests per million people. South Africa accounts for 30% of Africa's tests, although it has less than 5% of the population. Nigeria, which has 15% of the population, has carried out just 2% of testing. It began by testing strategically, then broadened it out, Health Minister Osagi Ehenira said. Chad and Burundi have carried out fewer than 500 tests each. Chad said it didn't have enough testing kits, and staff, after many of them, had fallen ill. Burundi did not respond. Tanzania has carried out 652 tests and identified 480 cases. The WHO estimates around 14% of COVID-19 patients will require hospitalization and oxygen support, and 5% will need a ventilator. Definition varies from country to country, but generally includes equipment for monitoring the patient and clearing their airway, access to oxygen, and more intensive staffing. Not all ICU beds in Africa have ventilators. Care beds are expensive, difficult to run, very unevenly distributed. Chad has only 10. Mauritius has 121. Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt have 1,920. South Africa has 3,300. Amid the COVID-19 shock, lower commodity prices and regional dependence on tourism and remittances will push current accounts in most sub-Saharan African countries into deficit in 2020. That's the IIF. Financing these deficits will be more challenging than in the past. You can say that again. Ethiopia, once one of the world's fastest growing economies, is seeing carefully laid plans unravel at warp speed. Quartz Africa. Ethiopia's once promising economy has run into a wall as the global economic crisis unleashed by the coronavirus pandemic devastates the nation of more than 100 million, forcing IMF to slash its GDP growth forecast for 2020 down to 3.2%. It's going to be a big negative number. They're off by at least 500 basis points. Country's economy grew by an average of 10.8% between 2004 and 2014. Ethiopia's Jobs Creation Commission has estimated close to 1.4 million workers will be affected by the pandemic, particularly in the service and manufacturing sectors. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic for Ethiopia is staggering, says Geda, an economics professor at Addis Ababa University. He predicts the pandemic could shrink Ethiopia's GDP by as much as 11.1% through 2020-2021. Tourism, which had around 10% of GDP in 2018, accounted for nearly half of all the country's export revenue, driven by Addis Ababa, which is the diplomatic capital of Africa, and Ethiopian Airlines. And personally, I think it's a hotspot, but they're just not testing properly. An urgent appeal for food assistance has reached a record high of 30 million people, according to Ethiopia's Planning Commission. Beyond its impact of health, it is crushing our economy. Exports of goods, especially by horticulture producers and garments from industrial parks, is falling unprecedentedly, causing economic distress, huge impact on government revenues and remittance flows. Debt to GDP ratio around 62% at the end of its fiscal year in June 2018 is about the sub-Saharan African average of around 60%. But the World Bank notes Ethiopia's public external debt service is up to 25.3% of national exports, which is the highest debt service to exports in sub-Saharan Africa. More accurate is this article by a gentleman called Yves Marie Stranger, which we looked at a couple of days ago, Galloping Ahead in Ethiopia by Yves Marie Stranger. An uneasy truce had prevailed ever since, with sporadic bouts of anarchy breaking out locally. New state of emergency promulgated on April 8 for health reasons this time round, and the postponement of the August 2020 elections froze a situation that was already catastrophic. The hold of the central government on the provinces was tenuous at best. Ethiopia has been recording growth rates of 10% for years. To put that in context, 10% growth means a doubling of the economy every 7 years. Winston Churchill could well have declared lies, lies, and damned Ethiopian statistics, but it didn't much matter if the numbers were fake or not. The country, after all, was only conforming to global economic orthodoxy. Read, if you like, the World Bank report on poverty reduction, which tells us that the rate of poverty has continued to fall in Ethiopia in 2010 to 2016, a conclusion that beggars belief. The report, while stating that the percentage of the very poor is stubbornly stuck at 10%, fails to point out that the population growth means the absolute number is increasing. 10% of 90 million Ethiopians in 2010 is 9 million, while 10% of 103 million inhabitants in 2016 makes for 10 million. Ethiopia's poor are today equivalent to the whole population of the country in the 1960s. Then he's saying, truly, the possibilities offered by limitless growth are, in a word, limitless. Sense of boundless opportunity partly explains why foreigners are so enamored by what they discover in Ethiopia. Case in point is Tyler Cowen's 2018 Ethiopia already is Africa's China on Bloomberg, a gushing piece that is so un-Straussian, so oblivious to reality, that I sought to rebuke Cowen with the humorous Ethiopian Economics 101. For a shorter take on Mr. Cohen's assertion, see Greg Cochrane's response, will Ethiopia be the next China? Asks Tyler Cowen. No, that's the full post, including the title. Today, there are 110 million people in Ethiopia, 60% of whom are under the age of 25, and the hope so brashly stoked yesterday with loose talk of middle-income country status to be achieved by 2025 is today turning to ill-contained rage. And then he's saying the country was caught in a dystopian nightmare, an explosive cocktail of the 19th century and an Abyssinian Blade Runner. Smartphones and ox ploughing, Facebook and sorcery, solar panels and beeswax candles. The contrast was too much to stomach, especially if the stomach happened to be empty. So, I think he's more accurate. As I said previously, this turns Ozymandias. I said that in October last year when I could see the debt pile up and the slowdown coming. I said, it seems to me that we're at a pivot moment. I was writing about Africa, not just Ethiopia. We can keep regurgitating the same old mantras like a stuck record, and if we do this, this turns Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. It would not be an exaggeration to say we're staring into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse, is what I said in March. Ethiopia emergency package from the IMF, $635 million for emergency food distribution, $430 million for health sector response under a worst-case scenario of over 100,000 COVID-19 cases. It's going to be considerably higher than that worst-case scenario. Population density for the whole of Africa, this is under the radar again. South African All Share, minus 12.38% year-to-date, dollar-rand 18.55. As I said previously, the saliva of COVID-19 patients can harbour 500 billion virus particles per teaspoon, and a cough aerosolizes it into a diffuse mist. And on that note, look at this photograph, an outdoor market largely frequented by working class families and informal street vendors in central Cairo on 4th May via The Guardian. Egyptian pound 15.75, EGX30 minus 27.11%. Another devaluation looms as naira depreciates on the forwards market. Nigeria's 5-year onshore non-deliverable forward contract posted its biggest drop by plunging 27% from 413.36 to close at 569.69. The 1-year non-deliverable forward contract was down 5% to 421.22. As I said on the 5th of March in an article in Africa Report, Nigeria's oil revenues cratering and a currency devaluation is now predicted and predictable. 9th of December was saying it was time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes, and then Moody's downgraded Nigeria to negative. We learned foreign investors were propping up the naira to the tune of 16 billion US dollars. And I said then, everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit. I predicted 1,000 naira by 2021 last year, and some people think I overreacted, said William Ukpe. We are moving from a world of hyperconnectedness to a world of quarantine. And the little bit of optimism in the oil markets, in part because of this. The first time since 26 March, we tracked 90,000 flights. That is still 53% below 6th of May last year. We're not going to get much more of a rebound than that. Drop in worldwide oil consumption in April has been put as much as 35 million barrels a day, and that's what's affecting the Nigerian economy. As I said, we're now entering the twilight zone for a lot of oil producers. Nigerian All Shares down 9.27%. Ghana Stock Exchange minus 9.53% year to date. This is interesting. Paul Kagame, then the rebel RPA leader, visiting Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire, Badolit Resort in 1992. That's from Kobo 3. It's a very strange photograph because Mobutu looks taller than Kagame, and Kagame is a very tall man. Mobutu had the remains of the assassinated Rwandan president Juvenal Habyarimana stored in a mausoleum in Badolit. On 12th May 1997, as Kabila's rebels were advancing on Badolit, Mobutu had the remains flown by cargo plane from his mausoleum to Kinshasa, where they waited on the tarmac of Njili Airport for 3 days. Interesting airport that, I've been there a few times. On 16th May, the day before Mobutu fled Zaire, Habyarimana's remains were burned under the supervision of an Indian Hindu leader. This is a photograph or two from President Mobutu's ruined jungle paradise, Badolit. A fountain with statues of lions, only 2 of the original 4 remain. That's from The Guardian. That took me back to Ozymandias. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Madame Agath, who was married to Juvenal Habyarimana, and this is what Philip Gurevich reported in a report in the New Yorker about the Munsinzi report. Madame Agath Habyarimana, the assassinated president's wife, who has long been rumoured to have been in on his killing. The report details at length how openly the Habyarimana assassination plot was spoken about in the months before his death. At one point, it notes that President Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire got wind of the plans and told Madame Agath to warn her husband, but she didn't. On a recent tour of Habyarimana's palace grounds, I was shown the plane's wreckage and also the solarium where the president's wife, popularly known as Madame Agath, was said to have sat and watched him fall to his death. This is a photograph of Juvenal Habyarimana. Mobutu Sese Seko was known as Kuku Mbendu wa Zabanga, otherwise Joseph Desire Mobutu, and he was the president of the Republic of Congo. President Kagame, I think being African is not a question of the colour of the skin, it's the mindset. Moody's changes the outlook on Kenya's rating to negative from stable, affirms the B2 rating. Here's the image. It could get worse with the rating agencies next week when IMF is expected to increase Kenya's risk of defaulting on debt repayments from moderate to high, tweets Mohamed Metwelie. Meaning rating agencies downgrade, then bond yields will worsen. Once you hit 10%, no turning back. Access to international markets will be limited. FX rate pressures cause of restricted debt-related periodic top-ups of FX. Have our Treasury mandarins and pundits noted that yesterday Moody's downgraded our sovereign credit outlook from moderate to negative? An economic crisis doesn't present a clearer prologue. W. Nyakera. Now, there are a number of problems. So it's inevitable, it's predicted and predictable first, right? And it's been very cavalier financial stewardship, which has now come to an end, essentially. The issue here is for the banks because they have huge investments in government securities, and I wrote about this at the back end of last year. This will create a negative feedback loop because as the country gets downgraded, the banks will get downgraded and the securities that they're holding. Kenya has the capacity to carry out 37,000 tests per day, a Senate report based on information from the Health Ministry found, but has only carried out about 26,000 in all, Reuters graphics. It does not have enough laboratory personnel, sample collection kits or supplies, and has also received faulty test kits as donations. We are preparing, said Dr. Juliet Nyaga, Chief Executive of Karen Hospital, a private facility in Kenya, as she showed Reuters an isolation unit they had set up in a nursing school, but it's like being in a movie that no one has ever rehearsed, and we didn't get the script. Here you see a man assembling new treatment beds at a field hospital built for COVID-19 patients, Aga Khan University Hospital in Nairobi. Kenya shilling is at 106. But given the Moody's story, it's not going to be able to hold that. Nairobi All Share is down 14.19% year to date, and the NSE20 is down 23.1% year to date. Wishing you a super weekend, and thank you if you've stayed until here. Wow, thank you.